There are 3 types of TCGs on the market right now, and I've got a 4th one for you at the end. What's up everyone, welcome back to Kitchen Table TCG. I hope you're having yourself a fantastic day. I hope that you're finding some joy in the trading card game world. Whether you be a collector, an investor, or a player, stop right now and ask yourself, are you finding joy in the hobby? And if the answer is no, take a step back and ask yourself why you're in it. Today we're going to talk about trading card games. I have 3 types of games that exist in 2022, and then at the end of this I have a 4th type that I think can exist in the future, and I think we're going to see here pretty soon. So these are 3 categories that I think every single one of the TCGs that we cover can fit into, and I think they're very important to look at, and it's very important to understand whether you are a player, investor, or collector, what goal your TCG has and which one of these categories they are trying to fit into, because if they try to do something different, I think it's that time where TCGs die, and that's when they don't survive. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. The first kind of type of TCG I'm going to call the top X games. Not the X games where you like skateboarding and, you know, Tony Hawk's awesome, but the top X games. Talking through whether you say the top 4 or top 5 or top 3 TCGs, the games that are trying to be the games that are trying to be the top of the top and be included in like the TCG player listings, and they be included on the front website, the top X games. So right now, obviously you have Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, 1 and 2, and then you have Yu-Gi-Oh, which is number 3. I don't really cover a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh on the channel. And then the fight is like, what's the next one? And obviously Flesh and Blood is trying to be, the new classic TCG, and Metazoo has all these big, huge plans and all these partnerships and these deals and all this stuff happening. And those 2 games, in my opinion, are trying to be top X games. They're trying to be games that are considered the top 4 or considered, the top or the peak of the iceberg, where every LGS or the majority of LGSs carry them. Like, I don't carry Yu-Gi-Oh, but the majority of LGSs carry their games, be like the Pokemon, the Magic, or whatever. And this comes with inherent risks and inherent rewards and a lot of interaction that you need to be aware of. Number 1, it's just a widespread thing. That is the ultimate goal. And that larger widespreadness equals a larger print run. And we've seen this in some of the games where in order to scale to that degree and to not be kind of this smaller thing, they have to print more boxes. And that causes the games to be a few things. Number 1, it causes the game to be less spiky. It doesn't just kind of go up and go down and kind of go all around. The game is an insistently less spiky game when it comes to the product because it's easier to access. So it's easier for other people to get involved in the game because there are more boxes printed and those, the marketing strategies and all that stuff. So with these top X games like Flesh and Blood and Metazoo, the question really is, and the risk for you really is, in the scaling and marketing side of the game. The question is, are they scaling correctly and appropriately? Are they marketing correctly and appropriately? Are they doing the things that are needed to be done in order to become one of those games? The reward here, and obviously we had the free tendy season of 2021 and all that. I'm now talking the future of 2022 and on. The reward here is that we are still in the early ages of these games. All these sets, Everfest, Wilderness, all those sets, you are still in the early stages if those games become top X games. If in the future Metazoo is the top 4 game or Flesh and Blood is the top 4 game, if in the future that is the case, then these sets currently are still the ground floor of those games. The risks that you are in with these are the companies scaling appropriately, and are they making the business moves required without overprinting, without oversaturating? Are they making the decisions required to scale correctly? So that is your risk. The second type of game that we have, so that's the top X games, is what I'm going to call the Dungeon TCGs. Ooh, whoa, the Dungeon TCGs. I like name calling. I like calling things names. These are the TCGs that are they're growing their game at more of a ground, like a grassroots, ground floor level. They're not reaching out to the major, huge, networks like Channel Snowball and Card Shop Live. They're not reaching out to the major places like that. They're trying to grow at the LGS level. They're trying to grow within these, I'm going to call them dungeon LGSs that are just kind of smaller within their own local areas and then branch out into the other areas. Games like Genesis, games like Legions, Genesis, amazing game we've talked about a lot on the channel. Legions, obviously I've got my Legions bundle, really cool, beautiful game. There's a lot of these games that are sprouting up right now with people who are passionate about game design, who love making TCGs, and they've got a local community around them that's supporting them, and they've reached out into the 10 local LGSs around them, and now they're branching out to the 15, 20 neighboring areas, and then they're coming into the United States. Genesis just announced a $50,000 prize support year, and there's a lot of really cool things that they're growing from a small to the wide, and they're just moving. I'm calling them Dungeon LGSs, Dungeon LGS games. And these things have this organic and slow nature, and in my opinion, at the current level that we are, these make them inherently less risky. They're not trying to, in 3 years, go from nothing to a top 4 game. They're not trying to scale. They're not taking those huge, massive risks. They're just kind of slowly growing, and it's working really, really well. There was, from both the player to the collector to the investor side, that is working really, really well. I think Genesis is a great one to look at. Genesis Beta Booster Box just sold for $700 on the market. A couple months ago, that was like a $200 box. It's crazy. But the point is that they have scaled correctly. They have scaled slowly, and those older things are now holding value. And I think you will see that with a lot of these other Dungeon LGS games that are kind of just trying to slowly grow. Their print runs are much smaller because they are scaling much more appropriately than the companies that are trying to be the top 4 games. It's just a slow organic growth, and it's more limited. The end goal of that is much different though. The end goal of a game like that is not being, Magic the Gathering. That's not the conversation. The conversation isn't a replacement for Magic the Gathering. The conversation is a game that is in a lot of LGSs, kind of like a Force of Will, kind of like a game like that is successful at a much different scale. And this is where coming and identifying what the success looks like for the individual game that you're interested in, whether that be collecting, investing, or playing, is really important. You can't have the expectation that simply isn't realistic for the game that you're looking at. So I think the risk in this is minimal. It's people who are going to just genuinely enjoy the gameplay, or even I know a couple people who are collecting some foils from Legions and from Genesis that they don't even play the game. They just like the way that it looks. And the point is that it's a less risky investment because the money behind it isn't as rapid. They don't need to come up with print runs of 100,000 boxes and have that capital and take that risk. And as the companies take that risk, what you run into is if they overprint and then distribution doesn't take them or doesn't take them again, it just runs into these problems. And so that's what these Dungeon LGS games have as an advantage of their risk tolerance, but their reward tolerance is also less, and it's important to talk about that. So those are the Dungeon LGS games. And then the last group of games I'm going to talk about until I have my 4th one is the flipper games. These are the ones that have little flippers on them, on their feet, and they're running around and swimming. These are the flipper games. And this is these are the games that if you're going to be involved in, you've got to be really paying attention, because this is high risk, high reward. A lot of these games are only really talked about online or at Discord. A lot of these games will never make it into an LGS. Simply put, they can't. There's a lot of things about them that won't happen. These are games that are being talked about a lot on those, the message boards and the Discords and stuff. There's a high, volatility to them. There's a high risk to them. It's fast paced. It feels a lot like an NFT. It's fast-paced, it's exciting, it's really cool. A lot of the cards are beautiful, and some of the most beautiful cards in any TCGs, but there are a lot of that kind of online culture that is spiking prices, and then there's gains being taken, and I don't know what the future is for those games. I'm not particularly involved in a lot of them. I do occasionally, get involved in one or two of them just kind of for fun to see what's going on. You probably won't hear me talking about those on the channel much. Those are high short-term risks with high short-term gains that I don't see a future with. I don't see in 10 years, I think we will be playing a couple of those top 4 games. In 10 years, I think we'll be playing a lot of the dungeon games still. I think more of the dungeon games will be successful in 10 years than the top 4 games. Simply put, the goals are much different. But I don't think many of these kind of flipper games will be around in 10 years, in my opinion. So if you're playing a long-term growth strategy, I would honestly pick some of those dungeon LGS games or top X games, whereas the flipper games are a much more short-term thing, which is completely okay. It's okay for the company, it's okay for you, and it's as long as you understand that it is high risk and high reward. So the last group of games is what I'm calling the bonus games. The bonus number 4, because I don't really have a name for it. These are sorry, before I get there, a lot of those games in the other ways are also Kickstarters. I think Kickstarter is great. I know Genesis had a Kickstarter. I know Sorcery. I honestly don't know where Sorcery fits in on this category quite yet. I know Sorcery had an amazing Kickstarter. Obviously, Nostalgics has had a pretty successful Kickstarter. There's a bunch of games. I'm sure I'm forgetting them. There's some really cool ones coming up that I've been looking at. But the 4th game type that I'm going to call is the Kickstarter game. And those games so far are not Kickstarter games. Those games are great games. Probably, most of them probably like the Dungeon LGS, maybe a couple of them trying to be top X games. But those games are games that got their start on Kickstarter. I think that there is a market in the future. I think in either 2022 or 2023, we will see a game that is just a Kickstarter game. That is not going to do anything but try to be a Kickstarter business and a Kickstarter game. This is something that we saw in the board game world in Zombicide. It was the best example that I have for it. Zombicide was one of the first Kickstarters I ever did. I absolutely freaking love this game, and Cool Mini or Not is the company behind it, and they essentially run, I think they've done some additional stuff now, but 3 or 4 years ago, it was essentially the entire business model was Kickstarter. Everything was, every new set was Kickstarter, and it worked. It was great. It got a ton of traction. It was played in the homes and all that stuff, but you could also pick it up as an LGS, could pick up a couple extra copies and sell it or whatever. And this is where I think that there's a huge business model. I think the TCG world is very connected to the LGS, and I love the LGS. Obviously, I own an LGS. I love the LGS, but the LGS system is a little bit dated. It is not the only way to grow a successful business. And TCGs at the end of the day are businesses. So I think the Kickstarter game is really cool because it scales appropriately. You have an exact amount of print run available. Your buyers buy this many boxes, and that is the number of boxes that exist. Anybody who wants to be involved in the game has the ability to get involved at the game at that time. And then there's another set coming out in 6 months that they have the ability to be involved in at that time if they missed out on it. So it scales appropriately. It's limited, so there are the free tendies that trading card game people mostly love. And then I think that this is a really cool dynamic where these games, honestly, I thought Sorcery could be a really good one, but I don't think that's their model. I don't think that's where they're going to go. But the idea where it's just a game that's really fun to be played at home with your family or with your friends, or even you bring it into your LGS and you play with a couple of local people after a Magic the Gathering night or after one of the top 4s or whatever. So it's fun to play at home. And then they have the LGS tiers. We've seen this with almost every Kickstarter game where they have a tier for the LGS. So if you as an LGS want to carry this game, Sorcery was a great example. If you want to carry Sorcery, you can back Sorcery at the LGS level that is only limited to you if you have a brick and mortar store, and there's promos and all that prize support that come with that. And if you want to build the scene locally, you have a full availability to do that. And every set that comes out, you could just pick it up, and that's basically from ordering from a distribution hub, and you don't need the distribution, and it works. Nobody's holding product back and all that stuff. So I think number 4, we will see that, the Kickstarter game that is purely a Kickstarter thing. Not to dig on the ones that have been successful on Kickstarter, they are choosing to use that money to kind of kickstart or jumpstart their business, and that is great. But I do think that there's a model in TCGs that can work for a solely Kickstarter game. We saw another one was Grand Archive that is doing, now they are going to distribution. I backed that on Kickstarter. Now they are doing, they're not going to be back on Kickstarter, they're going to distribution. So, at the end of the day, it is a crazy, if you're still here 15 minutes in, you obviously care about this. All these things are crazy. 2022 has been wild. There's a million games. I want to say that the cool thing about this is now that it's the new world and we've all got this technology and stuff, there are places to play online. The Discord server, the KitchenTableTCG Discord server is Patreon only, but it does have a great place to hang out with people. A lot of people who, we have sorcery channels. We have all the channels for all these new games. There's a bunch of people, there's some people playing Legions the other night. It's a really great place to hang out if you care about TCGs, and it does support content like this. That being said, let me know what you think about all these different TCGs and what, which area might have the best opportunity for growth in the comment section below. Hope you have yourself a fantastic day. Remember to be kind to the people around you, and whether you're a player, collector, or investor, remember to find joy in the hobby that we all love.